paper 2. Right, there is our paper. We are going to go through the paper and going to discuss the questions and also give the suggested possible responses to the questions. Right, as usual, our paper is out of 150, which means you can either answer 2 source-based questions and 1 essay, or you can answer 2 essays and 1 source-based question. Right, let's start with our first question, which is our question number 1, which is civil resistance from 1970s to 1980s. Right. Our focus of the question number 1, says, how did P.2 Botha's government react to the anti-apartheid media reporting during the 1980s? How did P.2 Botha's government react to the anti-apartheid media reporting during the 1980s? That is the focus of our question. Identify the community newspaper in the source that was established in 1980. That is an extraction question, which is a level 1 question. We want to identify a community newspaper which was established in 1980. Right, it says Grassroots, a community newspaper, was eventually birthed or established in 1980. So our response is the Grassroots. That is the name of the community newspaper that was born in 1980, that was established in 1980. So our response is the Grassroots. The Grassroots. Right, that is our first response. That was a community newspaper which was born in 1980 according to our source. Right, moving on to the next question. It says, name any 3 democratic organizations in the source that provided volunteers who worked for the Grassroots community newspapers. 3 democratic organizations. It means we must also extract the responses. We want to find out about the democratic organizations. Right, we are told that the paper made up of volunteers from 60 democratic organizations, such as the Western Cape Civic Association, which is the WCCA, the Cape Areas Housing Action Committee, which is the CAHASC, women's and youth organizations, the youth under the Cape Youth Congress. Right. Some of those community organizations who were the volunteers, some of those democratic organizations, we can mention any of those as our responses to the question. So just to summarize, we can talk about the WCCA. We can also talk of the CAHAC. We can also talk of the CAYCO. Right. Why do you think Samstan encountered constant police harassment while it was only a community news letter? Why do you think Samstan encountered? Let's check the context of Samstan. It says, by 1984, the community support of Grassroots encouraged the formation of Samstat with United We Stand, a community newsletter established in the small rural town of Swellendam in the Cape Province. It soon moved base to Osun, a larger, mainly rural town, also in the Cape. From the start, it encountered constant police harassment in an area where police vigilance or awareness was high compared with Cape Town. So we are looking at the reasons why was it under attack. Why did it encounter constant police harassment as a publication? It was just a newsletter, which was a communal newspaper a community newsletter in the rural area, but it was encountered with constant police harassment. What could be the reasons? Right. In this instance, we can say it was harassed because of its influence on the rural community. Right. Remember, the main target for mobilization were the rural communities, where these newspapers wanted to encourage Black people to unite and fight against oppression. So their main target was to influence rural people. So its influence on the rural people was felt by the apartheid government as a threat, and hence they wanted to harass the newsletter publication and hence to try and ban its influence on the rural community. And also we can say it was part of the repressive system in general, repressive system of the government. It was the duty of the government to ensure that any publication which is against the principles of apartheid was supposed to be met with some challenging force to try and reduce its influence on the challenge to apartheid. Right. Using the information in the source and your own knowledge, explain how the UDF contributed to the mobilization of internal resistance. Right. When you're looking at the UDF, this is one of the key organizations towards the challenge towards oppressive rule of the apartheid regime. And if you look at the main themes of the UDF, what the UDF did, we can talk about the Don't Vote campaign as one of its major successful moves towards fighting against apartheid. They instituted the Don't Vote campaign, which was against the tricameral parliament, whereby they were mobilizing the Indians and the colors not to vote in the tricameral parliament system. And also can look at the Million Signature campaign. It's also another move that was done by the UDF, which is very important. It was a petition. And also in that petition, we also talk of the issue of educating the people. Educating the masses. As they were advocating for the petition, for the signatures, they were also educating the people. So we can say in general, using your own knowledge, whatever is in the source is also relevant. We can talk about the UDF advocating for the Don't Vote campaign, which was against the tricameral elections. And also you can look at the million signature petition, and also can looking at how they try to educate the masses to participate actively in the challenge against oppression by the apartheid regime. Then we'll go on to number 2, 1.2. 1.2 says, comment on the symbolic representation of the following in the cartoon regarding Stoffel Botha's extreme measures in banning print media. Let's look at how he is portrayed. This is source 1B. You can see it says, the cartoon below entitled Mass Funeral in South Africa drawn from E. Helm appeared in an American newspaper, Fort Worth Star-Telegram in Texas on 8 September 1986. It depicts the Minister of Home Affairs, Stoffel Botha's extreme measures in banning and censoring the media to protect P.2 Botha's government from criticism. So we see this is our minister who is trying to bury the newspapers. You can see these are newspapers which are being buried. And if we see, this is a grave is portrayed by this dark shaded part, which is the grave where the newspapers are being thrown into for burial. And also we are seeing in the background their onlookers there. That's the impression of our cartoon. So our first question is saying, comment on the symbolic representation of the following. We are looking at onlookers who are standing in the background. What does it represent? Right. Those onlookers, we can say, they are the ordinary civilians. Or the blacks and other oppressed races. They are just checking helplessly. On the banning of the media. The onlookers, they are just civilians or the black people who are just watching helplessly on the banning of the media. There's nothing that they are doing there. They're just watching over the government dictating on what must be done to the print media. And then a grave in the foreground. We are seeing a grave in the foreground. What does it symbolize? It symbolizes the banning or the censorship of the print media. Or in other ways, we are saying the grave, it symbolizes the death of resistance to apartheid through media. Media is being buried. So, in other words, you are saying there is death of opposition through print and media, in other sense. Right. Why you would consider the caption of the cartoon "Mass Funeral in South Africa" appropriate in the context of the Home Affairs Minister Stoffel Botha's media restrictions in the 1980? Why would we consider this caption "Mass Funerals in South Africa"? There is mass funeral in South Africa. Otherwise, you are saying there's a mass grave. So what is the implication? Is it appropriate? It's appropriate in the sense that many newspapers or newsletters were banned or they were censored at once through an act of parliament. So why is it a mass grave? We are saying, why is it a mass funeral? The mass part represents that there were many newspapers or newsletters that were banned. And they were buried at once because this was dictated through an act of parliament, which gave the minister powers to ban or censor the newspapers or the newsletters which were published against apartheid, or were exposing the negative implications of apartheid on the people. Right. Or can say it was also a mass funeral because it marked a significant shift in the mobilization of people through print media. We can also look at it on the dimension of the influence of the print media on mobilizing people. It meant that now there was death in the mobilization. There was no more effective mobilization of the people through the print media because the media was censored or was banned. Can also be another possible response to that question. Right, we move on to question number 1.3. So using source 1C, list 4 types of activities in the source that the media was restricted from reporting on when a national state of emergency was declared in June 1986. So we are looking at a situation of a state of emergency and the media being restricted on some of the publications that they were supposed to focus on when they are reporting. So we look at our source. It says, South Africa provoked or triggered a worldwide uproar by imposing or enforcing a tight restriction to the media when the national state of emergency was declared in June 1986, after months of black protest violence. The CABs, or the controlled, banned first-hand reporting, banned first-hand reporting of political unrest. That is one of the aspects that were or activities that the media was restricted from reporting. You're not supposed to report I'll give first-hand reporting of political unrest. And it goes on to say, severely restricted news about strikes. So news about strikes were supposed to also not be reported, and also anti-apartheid boycotts were also not supposed to be reported. Right. And also we see it goes on to say, and such unofficial town structures as people's courts and street committees. They were not supposed to be reported on, whatever their activities. People's courts and street committees, they were also banned. So that is where we find our response for the first question, number 131. Let's move on to question number 132. Define the concept, the term revolution in your own words. Right. When we're talking of a revolution, we're looking at, in history, it's a period of great change, which is usually realized violently. Bringing transformation to the people's lives. So basically, a revolution, we are saying, it's a type of change, but the change is not realized using passive methods. It's used using violent methods. And ultimately, that is going to bring a very seen transformation in the way of lives of people. And in this instance, relating to our apartheid, we are saying people were fighting for a complete change of the removal of the oppression system in the favor of advocating for a fair and democratic system which regarded the rights of all the living people. Why do you think Stoffel Botha imposed restrictions on reports about outlawed black nationalist group? Why did the minister impose restrictions? He did not want newspapers to report about black nationalist groups that were banned. For example, the ANC, the PAC, they did not want to hear any reports about those banned or outlawed nationalist groups. Right. The possible reason there is the reports ultimately strengthened their support. Underground or in exile. These organizations here, because of the punishment that was imposed by the government, they were now operating either in hiding underground or they were operating in exile. So publishing about their events or publishing about their planned activities, it was going to strengthen the support towards them, and hence it was going to cause more instability in the country. So they did not want such news to be spread, such that their support will become weakened, and also they would not have to pose a significant challenge on the operation of the apartheid system. Explain why Agri-Classe regarded the Sowetan as the only kind of avenue where black people could vent some of their deeply held feelings against Botha's government reforms. If we check in the source, you tend to find information about that particular aspect in question. It says newspapers like the Sowetan say they would fight government action in court. Black newspapers fear that government action against them could close one of the few remaining pressure valves for the voteless black majority and lead to more frustration and violence in the township. For black people, papers like ours are the only kind of avenue where they can vent or open some of their deeply held feelings. And now it's going to be stopped. Agree? Class C said. So we are looking at the implication of this statement here. Why Agri-Classe regarded the Sowetan as the only kind of avenue that could be used by Black people to vent or share some of their deeply held feelings against the unfairness. Right, for the first reason, we can say it was the only Black affiliated newspaper or publication. Affiliated publication that could fight government. Censorship and banning in court. So it remained as the only publication which could challenge or which could fight against the censorship by the government in court. And for that reason, it became the sole way of Black people to vent or share their deeply held feelings. Right, number 141, it says, identify two political events in the source which coincided with Moifela Moseki arrival at the Sowetan newspaper. That is an extraction question. What happened when he encountered himself at the Sowetan newspaper? Right, we are told that his arrival at the Sowetan coincided with, there were rent protests in the Val Township, coincided with rent protests. So we can see from there, it says coincided with rent protests in the Val Townships and the uprising and the tri-cameral parliament elections. So those two are the events that coincided with his visit to the Sowetan. So number one, it was rent protests in the Val. And number two, it was the tricameral parliament elections. Right, quote two pieces of evidence from the source that suggests that the papers of Sowetan and reporters paid heavily for reporting against apartheid. Right, that is an extraction. It says, but the paper and the reporters paid heavily. Some were seriously injured, in some cases accidentally. Company cars and photographic equipment were confiscated. That is the issue of how those guys paid heavily for reporting against. During the squabble, some were injured accidentally. The cars, company cars, were confiscated, and also photographic equipment was also taken by the state. Right. Then what is implied by the phrase Sowetan editors had long ago lost whatever fear they had of the government laws in the context of reporting negatively about the police? If it says they had long ago lost whatever fear, it means they were so dedicated to save the interests of blacks by exposing the government. So if they had long ago lost whatever fear, it means they were no longer fearing anything. They were dedicated to save the interests. Or we can also look at it from another dimension, that they had several attacks since back then, and now they were resistant enough to such threats from the government laws. I'd explain the term censorship laws. What are censorship laws in this instance? We are looking at, we can say these are legal frameworks Legal frameworks set by P.2, Botha government, apartheid government. What were they meant to? Those are legal frameworks. They were meant to restrict or prohibit publications and distribution of news that exposed apartheid. So we are saying when we are applying censorship, we are saying the government is the one that is in control of the media. If it's the print media, they decide on what must be published regarding the apartheid system. So they were censoring in the sense that they were banning some of the organizations or some of the publications, and they were also restricting what must be shared in terms of the news. Any kind of news that was against the apartheid system or that tend to expose the side or the negative implications of apartheid when the black people was not supposed to be published. That was basically the censorship part. Comment on the usefulness of this source to a historian researching the censorship of the media in South Africa during the 1980s. We are looking at the usefulness of the source to someone who is researching on the implication on censorship. So basically, we can say this source is useful. Why? It talks about the Sowetan. Yeah. The government's response to the Sowetan. It says some of the reporters, they were injured. And some accidentally, company cars and photographic equipment were confiscated. It shows us the extent of the government's dedication towards censorship, which is useful information. The government got to the extent of confiscating company cars and also photographic equipment as a way of trying to avoid the publication from distributing news against apartheid. And also, it talks about the minister. This all was done by under instruction of the minister. It also tells us about the involvement of the minister in regard to the censorship. And also looking at, if we look here, it talks about, this was a trend for all papers during the mid-80s, except for pro-government Afrikaans press. It also tells us that publications which are pro-government, which were supporting government moves, and also which were Afrikaner, they were not banned. It's also useful information because it tells us that censorship was only applicable to the newspapers which were against apartheid regime. But however, those that were pro-government, they were not banned. It's useful information. And any other useful information that you can pick from that source. Then number 1.5, question number 1.5, it says, refer to source 1C and 1D. Explain how the information in source 1D supports evidence in source 1C regarding the introduction of media restrictions by Stoffel Botha. We are comparing source 1C and source 1D. Right, we're not going to go through the sources, but we're just going to highlight on the differences. If you check source 1C, it talks about restrictions on the media and how is it supported by source 1D. If you check in source 1D, it talks about the Sowetan being warned which shows that the government was imposing restrictions. The government is imposing restrictions on the media, and also they are warning the Sowetan of publicizing information or news which were against the apartheid regime, which shows that they were going forward the idea of restricting the publications. And also, if we look closely, we can also see that in source 1C, it talks about Botha's restrictions. Are subjective or are one-sided. How do we also have the same idea? In 1D, it says pro-government Afrikaans newspapers were not subject to restrictions. So it means there is an impartial treatment of the publications there. There is subjectiveness, there is one-sidedness. He is actually promoting pro-government Afrikaans newspapers while he's banning the other publications which were not pro-government or which were publishing the brutality of the system. Right, and any other comparisons that you can find. Let's go to question number 1.6. Right, question number 1.6, we are going to explore the question. Using the information in the relevant sources and your own knowledge, write a paragraph of about 8 lines explaining how P.2 Botha reacted to the anti-apartheid media. We want the reaction to anti-apartheid media. How did he respond to anti-apartheid media? Right, so as usual, your paragraph, you have to structure it in the appeal format. So our question is saying how the government reacted to anti-apartheid reporting, media reporting this. So that's our question. So we must structure our paragraphs. I'll split my paragraph into the right setup of a paragraph, which is the appeal format. We need to have a clear point answering the question. How did the government react? In this instance, I'll take my answer as the government reacted with brutal force, banning and censoring anti-apartheid media. That is my answer. You can adopt your own line of argument, your own answer to that question, but that is my answer. I'll say the government reacted with brutal force, banning and censoring anti-apartheid reporting. Then I'll explain what did the government do. The government instituted a state of emergency and imposed harsh measures. Harsh measures on media that portrayed the government in negative light. I'm explaining in my own words without using information from the paragraphs. Right. So this is my explanation. Then I'll go on to explore my evidences from the source. My piece of evidence, there are many pieces of evidence there. I can use the piece of evidence source 1D about the Sowetan newspaper. The Sowetan reporters were injured accidentally. The company cars were confiscated. The company cars and equipment got confiscated. I took this from source 1D. Then we can also highlight some other piece of evidence. The Home Affairs Minister had to censor or close newspapers fueling revolution. I got this from source 1C. Then I will then provide my link as the last part of the, but remember, we are writing continuously as a paragraph. The government therefore took total control of the media publications by the use of force. So we are trying to refer back that the government was violent and it imposed harsh measures to the publications which were exposing anti-apartheid activities. Right, that takes us to the end of our question number 1. We move on to question number 2. Question number 2 is the TRC. Our focus of the question is saying, why was the granting of amnesty by the TRC to the security branch policeman for death of Stanza Bopape considered controversial? Right. Our first question says, quote 2 ways from the source showing how Stanza Bopape was described before he died in police custody. Right, we want to find 2 ways of how Stanza was described. He was described as a well-known activist, and also he was the General Secretary of Mamelodi Civic Association. That is his description. 1 as a well-known activist, and number 2 as the General Secretary of Mamelodi Civic Association. Right, the next question says, according to the source, what did General Johan van der Merwe approve to avoid the negative political ramifications or results of Stanza Bopape's death in police custody? That is also according to the source. It's an extraction, a question. We just have to go to the source. Right. It says, a high-level cover-up, including a first escape and a secret disposal of Bopape's body, was approved by Commissioner of Police General Johan van der Merwe in order to avoid negative political ramification of his death in police custody. So he ultimately approved a high-level cover-up that included a fake escape and secret disposal of Bopape's body. So basically, we are saying they planned for a cover-up so that the death would not be able to be disclosed and be known to the people. They did a fake escape report that he actually escaped from police custody, and also they secretly disposed his body without anyone noticing. Right. Then define the term amnesty in your own words. I will define it in my own words. You can also define it in your own understanding. I will say this is an official pardon, or it's an official forgiveness for politically motivated crimes. That's my context of definition. You can also define it, but the basic idea is there should be an element of pardoning or forgiveness there. If someone is forgiven for committing a politically motivated crime, they would have been on amnesty. Right. What conclusion can you draw from the fact that the Minister of Law and Order, VLOC, supported the security branch policeman's version of Stanza Bopape's escape? What conclusion can we say if the Minister of Law and Order supported the version of Stanza Bopape's escape? The conclusion there is that they worked together to eliminate any opposition to apartheid. Otherwise, they were very strongly supporting each other to eliminate any element which was opposing the system. We see the Minister of Law and Order was supposed to advocate for the application of the law to the situation. But however, he's also going against the principles of the basic law and supporting the policemen who made that an activist. So it ultimately gives us a conclusion that they were working together. They knew each other very well, that their aim was to eliminate any opposition to apartheid. Using the information in the source and your own knowledge, explain why Stanza Bopape's mother pleaded with the police who were with him to come here and tell us where the bones are. Why did the mother want to have the police who were with him to come? Right, we can say the mother, she wanted to know the truth. For closure. She wanted to know actually what happened to a child, and have a closure at the end. Or for the sake of wanting the police, she also wanted to know where the remains were buried. Ultimately, for proper burial. Those could be the responses that are possible. Why the mother was pleading with the police who were with him to come and tell us. She wanted to actually get the truth of what happened towards her son for closure. And also she wanted to know where they ultimately buried the remains in the event that they murdered him. Right. Explain with the reference to them in Francina Bopape's statement. What is the implication of them? She's saying, all I'm asking of them is to tell the truth and give me stanza response. So this them here, the question is saying, explain the reference to them in Francina Bopape. Right. So in this instance, we are saying that them is referring to the security branch policemen. The security branch policemen ultimately who murdered a son. What is implied by the statement? All I am asking of them is to tell the truth in the context of Stanza Bopape's whereabouts. All I am asking of them is to tell the truth. So the implication there is, if she's only asking for the truth, she ultimately, she knew well that her son was murdered. That was obvious to her because of their efforts that they had made to try and check with ANC in exile. They couldn't find information regarding his whereabouts. So the suggestion that was given by the police that he might have fled into exile was not holding water for her. She ultimately knew that her son was murdered. Or can also say she wanted full disclosure of the facts towards her son's death. She also wanted to find out about how they ultimately killed her son, because she didn't know, but what she knew was her son was no more. And also can say she wanted to know about the remains. It can also be a possible response that she wanted to know about the remains of her own child. Right, let's go to question 2.3. Quote any 3 actions from the source showing how Stanza Bopape was interrogated by the security branch policemen. How did they interrogate him? Right, we are looking at source 2C. In source 2C, it says, on 12th June 1988, Mr. Bopape was questioned by Mr. Moset and Mr. Engelbrecht at John Foster Square. He refused to cooperate and denied any violent involvement with the ANC or terrorist activities. I spoke to him personally and explained the seriousness of his detention under Section 29, but he still refused to talk. Later that day, we discussed the situation and decided to give him a fright. Right. So we are saying, how did they interrogate him? How did they try to find out information from him? Right. Initially, he was questioned. They questioned him, of which he refused to disclose any information. What then did they do after questioning and it failed? They tried to scare him so that he would cooperate. And still, there was no information that was disclosed by him. Then what else did they do? We tied Mr. Bopape to a strong wooden chair in the corridor outside my office. That was now brutal interrogation. And they removed his shirt and his hands and feet were bound to the chair. And then they operated the electric shock on him. So ultimately, that was their way of interrogation. They started by questioning him. They tried to scare him. Then they tied him to a wooden chair, removed his shirt, and tied his hands and feet bound to the chair. They electrocuted him. And ultimately, that is how he died. Right, we move on to the next part. Identify any 2 security branch policemen in the source who were present when Stanza Bopape was interrogated. Who was present during the time of interrogation? You can check from our source. It says myself, Major Charles Lee, Warrant Officer Enrique Mosetet, Sergeant Johan Jupris and Constable believed that he had died. So these were the ones who were present. The question is asking about, this is question number 323. Major Charles Lee, Warrant Officer Enrique Mostet, Sergeant Johan Jupris, and Constable Chagbos Engrubot. Those were the ones who were available, and they believed that he had died. Right. We move on to the next part. It says, using the information in the source and your own knowledge, what does the statement, "It was never our intention to kill him," suggest about the security branch policeman's interrogation methods? What kind of methods did they use? We can say their methods were cruel or they were brutal. Or we can also say their methods were against basic human rights. For example, we can talk of the use of torture. Those methods are torture methods, inflicting severe pain on someone's body. Those methods are against basic human rights. So they were disregarding basic human rights. They were using methods that were cruel. Or we can also say they used violent and life-threatening methods. It means those methods had good potential to kill someone. So those were the type of methods that they were using to interrogate, to find information from their victims. Right. We move on to the next question. Quote the controversial findings of the TRC from the source regarding the death of Stanza Bopape. The controversial finding. Right. That is source or 2D. It says the Truth and Reconciliation Commission came to yet another controversial finding when it granted amnesty to 10 former security policemen for their role in the murder of Mamelodi activist Stanza Bopape in June 1988. That was the controversial event that happened there. That was the controversial finding. Name the head of the security police in the source who applied for amnesty in the Stanza Bopape's case. It's also an extraction question. We just have to go to the source and extract the relevant information, which gives us an answer to the question. It says, it is only the case before the commission in which a full array displaying of police ranks from constable to the then head of state of security police and South African first post-apartheid police commissioner, General Johannes Field Vanta Merwe. Right, that was the name of the head of the security police who applied for amnesty. Right. Then the next question is saying, explain the term full disclosure as a condition required by the TRC. For one to be granted amnesty, they were supposed to meet the full disclosure criteria or a condition. So what is full disclosure? I can discuss it as to present all the relevant facts behind a criminal act before the TRC. That is my simple definition. We are talking about full disclosure. We are saying to present all the relevant facts behind a criminal act before the TRC. You have to say everything that happened in that in the context of that particular crime in question. Right. We move on to the next question. What is implied by the statement? Applicants presented a well-oiled account during the testimony before the TRC hearings. When someone is presenting a well-oiled account, what does it imply? It implies that they lied. They presented a perfectly rehearsed account. So basically, when I said it was well-oiled, it was a lie. They were lying. But in their lie, they had rehearsed that. They presented facts which were perfectly rehearsed, which showed evidence that these guys had settled down and planned how they were going to present their case before the TRC. So it was well-oiled in the sense that it was a lie, but which is presented in a perfect way, a perfectly rehearsed way. Meaning to say, they had rehearsed how they were going to present their facts. Comment on why a historian would find the source reliable when researching the evidence submitted at the TRC hearing on the disappearance of Stanza Bopape. Right, we check on reliability from the source. When you check on reliability, we are saying, is the source accurate? Right, the source can be accurate. Why? It is by P.2, a former TRC investigator. This is a person who was involved in the events of the TRC, so we can rely on that. And also, it appeared on 28 April 2000, which is very close to the term of the operation of the TRC. We can also talk about that as reliability. And also, if we check, it talks about the death of Stanza Bopape, who was well-known. He was a well-known activist. So we can tend to rely because he's talking about the death of someone who was well known as an activist against apartheid. So that's some of the pieces that we can use to comment on the reliability of the source. Right, we move on to the next question. It says, refer to source 2C and source 2D. Explain how the source 2D differs from source 2C regarding TRC's decisions. We are going to compare it from the sources and see how those two sources are different. We are comparing C and D. Right, let's start with C. Source C is saying, the TRC concluded, we are in the circumstance and in the light of what is said above, satisfied that they've made a full disclosure. So in this instance, we are saying the TRC was satisfied that these guys had made a full disclosure. But let's go to the next source. This is differing from this source, which says the applicants presented a well-oiled account of events that carefully interlocked and reinforced each other's version, which means the TRC, if you are satisfied and these guys are lying, it means there's a difference there, because if they are lying, the TRC was not supposed to be satisfied. So it gives us a contrast. And also, if we try to check, we can also see that the first source 2C It says the TRC was certain that there was full disclosure of all relevant facts. It talks about all the relevant facts. And if you also check here about the facts, what did they say? It says an examination of the amnesty transcripts and judgments reveals a selective use of available evidence and no attempt to make further inquiries regarding a wide range of relevant issues. So there were issues that remained unquestionable there that were not questioned, which were supposed to give or to reveal some of the lies that were being told by these guys. But however, we are saying the TRC in this source was satisfied that there was full disclosure of all relevant facts. There were no relevant facts that were fully disclosed if they did not inquire on some of those facts. So it gives us a contrast there. And also we can look at, as a result, the application for amnesty was successful in that source. And also if you check here, it shows that the application was not supposed to be successful because they did not meet the criteria of full disclosure and also of truthful disclosure. In this case, we are saying they could have been contrived or false and selective in detail. So the TRC was satisfied, but however, in this source, those people could have been contrived of false or selective in detail. Right. That is basically how we compare those two sources. That was a difference in the two sources. Right, let's look at our question 2.6. Using the information in the source, the relevant sources, you only write a paragraph about 8 lines, explaining why the granting of amnesty by the TRC to the security branch for the death of Stanza Bopape was considered controversial. Right. It was controversial. In your point, you have to highlight why you say it was controversial. Why you say it was controversial. You can say the TRC granted amnesty to perpetrators who did not qualify for amnesty because they did not make a full disclosure of relevant facts. That can be your answer. Then you go on to explain what happened there. You are now giving more evidence to the controversy of the granting of the amnesty. Mainly, if you check our source, which has got more evidence to show that it was controversial, is source 2D. It talks about the examination. An examination of the amnesty transcript and judgment revealed a selective use of available evidence. So that is an explanation. There was selective use of available evidence. And also, if you check there, you find supporting evidence in that source. There was no attempt to make further inquiries. It's another argument. And in the process, there was no attempt to make further inquiries. Then you can go on to quote some evidence as to why it was controversial. Like from source 2C, you can check there. If you check source 2C, it says the TRC was satisfied that there was full disclosure. As an example from source 2C. So we're actually pointing out to see how it was a controversy. And then we can link back to our line of argument. This clearly contradicts the TRC Act. On granting of amnesty. So we are seeing how we are answering our paragraph question. We are responding to the controversy. Why is it controversial? People who did not deserve to be given amnesty were ultimately given amnesty. Why? Because the TRC did not ultimately investigate further into the matter. And also it was supposed to figure out that there was evidence of a stage-managed presentation, a presentation which was planned before the commission. And hence the TRC was not supposed to give the guys amnesty. And hence we say it was a controversy, granting amnesty to undeserving perpetrators. Right, that takes us to the end of question number 2. We move on to question number 3. Question number 3 says, name any two regions where China's BRI had potential to transform the geo-economic landscape. This is about Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, benefit BRICS plus countries. So our first question is an extraction question. We are supposed to find our answer from the source. We want to find two regions where China's BRI has potential. Right, if we check here, it says, China's ambitious Belt and Road Initiative has potential to transform geo-economic landscape of Asia, Middle East, Africa, and even Europe. Those are the two regions, the 4 regions given. And then it goes on to say, according to the source, which 2 banks supported the BRI projects? We are supposed to extract from the source. The BRI projects are to be backed by a 40 US billion Silk Road Infrastructure Fund, which was supported by the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, Asian Infrastructure Development Bank, and the Shanghai BRICS Bank, or to give its formal name, the New Development Bank. So those are the 2 banks which are responsible. Then the next question is saying, explain what is implied by a phrase, win-win situation in the context of Chinese BRI investment in developing countries. When you are looking at it being a win-win situation, we are saying developing countries will benefit through infrastructure development and also investment opportunities. While this is one part, and also we are looking at the side of China. China will get a market for its products, or will also get a source of raw materials. So it's a win-win in the sense that developing countries are benefiting, and also China is benefiting in one direction. So developing countries, mainly, they benefit in infrastructure development in their countries, and also in terms of investment opportunities. And in China, they also get a new market for their products, and also they can also access raw materials for their industries. Why do you think BRICS partners, Russia and India, have reservations about China's Belt and Road initiatives? Why do they have reservations? There are reservations there. They feel China wants to have dominance over the world geopolitical. So their feel is China is the leading partner, and hence it wants to have dominance over the agreement, and also it wants to ultimately become the world leader. That is why they have that reservation. List any 3 of the 5 connectivities that China scholars believe is a common way forward for both BRI and BRICS. That is extraction. We just have to get our answers from the source. I want to look at the 3 connectivities. It says Chinese scholars or researchers are of the opinion that the 5 connectivities, which are policy, infrastructure, trade, finance, and people to people, is the common way for both BRI and BRICS. That is number 3.2.1. Let's go to 3.2.2. Explain in what way strengthening the interconnection between BRI and BRICS would be of benefit to China. We are saying, how does China benefit if there is an interconnection between the BRI and also the BRICS countries? Right. If China is developing infrastructure in the BRICS countries, it means it is going to have an easy access to markets. It can be a benefit, or China is going to have a wider market for its products. We can also say China can benefit through access to raw materials. That can also be another benefit. Why do you think China's view of itself as the leading power center or dominant power with BRICS could negatively affect relations amongst the BRIC members? If China is assuming the dominant role in the BRICS, how could that negatively affect the relations between China and the other members? We can say China, it would impose ideas on other countries. And that was going to weaken the relationship. If China is assuming the dominant role, it means it is the one that is going to impose ideas on others. And also, besides imposing ideas, other countries might retaliate. They might retaliate to the advancement by China as a leading, and hence weakening the cooperation. So we are saying if China assumes a leading role, other countries might also try to assume the same role, and hence that is going to pose competition, and that is going to weaken the relationship of the cooperation of those countries. Explain how the United States is depicted in the cartoon. Let's look at the cartoon and try to figure out how the United States is depicted in the very cartoon. Right, we are seeing this is our United States shown by that gentleman. So what kind? He's saying that China's debt trap is referring to the China's Belt and Road Initiative. So the question is saying, from that cartoon there, we want to ultimately look at how the United States is depicted. Right. We can say the depiction here, this guy with the long nose, what's the implication of someone who is cartooned, who is figured out with a long nose? We can say it's dishonesty. Is portrayed as a dishonesty figure who wants to portray China as a bad partner of development. Or we can say it's a saboteur. He wants to sabotage the progress that is being made by the BRICS countries by telling other countries that they are being trapped into a debt trap. Or we can say it's a contrarian. Someone who is going against the ideas, who is always contrasting the progress of others. That's basically how we can discuss and describe the USA. What impression does the cartoon give of the BRI? Use visual clues to substantiate your response. What impression? So the impression there, let's also look at the cartoon and try to figure out the impression. We are seeing the China's Belt and Road Initiative is shown on the TV. Like here, it's screened. And we are seeing the USA addressing with regard to the China's road initiative. So that might mean that the China's Belt and Road Initiative, according to this, is not realistic. The initiative is portrayed as unrealistic or as unsuccessful because it's being televised. It shows that something on the TV. And also, it gives us an impression that the USA's perspective is the reality. Why? Because the USA is actually addressing the world, while the initiative is only on television. So it means this is unrealistic, but what the USA is saying, by addressing the world, it shows that that is the reality of what is going to happen. But what the Chinese are initiating is just something, this is unrealistic, something that does not exist. Right. We move to the next question. Comment on the limitations of this source to a historian studying the benefits of China's Belt and Road initiatives. Let's look at the type of the source and also look at the author of the source. Right, it says the cartoon drawn by the Chinese cartoonist M. Honglingan appeared in the People's Online 22 August 2023 depicts USA's claim that China's Belt and Road Initiative is a debt trap. Right. What are the limitations there if we're looking at this source? We are saying the source is limited. Why? Because it's biased. It's one-sided. To the side of China. It gives us an impression that USA is ultimately portraying a bad image of the developments being done by China. So it's one-sided, it's biased. It does not give us the view of the Americans. This author is a Chinese and is biased towards his side of China and does not give us a clue about the view of the Americans. Then also we can say it's a propaganda. It's meant to tarnish the US image. You can also say it's limited for that sake. It's a propaganda source, which is meant to tarnish the image of the USA. Or it is meant to convince the people who are part of the BRICS to think that America is ultimately against their propositions and their initiatives. Right. And any other things that you might figure out as pieces of limitations to that source. We move on to the next question. According to the source, state 3 opportunities that entry into BRICS has offered to Ethiopia. That is an extraction question. We go to the source and find that Ethiopia's 2024 entry into BRICS offered new opportunities for funding. Right, so we are saying the opportunities that were afforded or that were made available through the entry, there was opportunity for funding and also for technology exchange and for strategic partnerships. Those were the opportunities according to the source. Opportunity for funding, opportunity for technology exchange, and also for strategic partnership. Right, next question is saying, identify the 2 traditionally dominant Western lenders in the source that BRICS wishes to be independent from. The lenders which are dominant, we have the World Bank and we also have the International Monetary Fund. Those are the dominant Western lenders that the BRICS are trying to avoid. Explain the term South-South cooperation in the context of globalization. South-South cooperation, we're looking at the Southern Divide. So we are saying working together to foster development. By countries in the Southern Divide. So we are looking at the North-South divide. When we're looking at South-South, we are saying countries in the Southern Divide, they are working together to foster development amongst themselves. Why do you think supporters of BRI would consider Addis Ababa-Djibouti railway success? If we check there, why is it successful? It says this railway has significantly reduced the transport time from 3 days to less than 12 hours, improving trade efficiency, cutting costs, and reshaping the architecture of logistics within the region. That is basically the benefit there. They will consider it a benefit because it has reduced the transportation time. It has also cut on costs. It has also improved trade efficiency and has reshaped the architecture of logistics in the region. Right. We move on to the next question. It says, refer to source 3B and 3D. Explain how source 3D supports source 3B with regards to China's use of BRI to strengthen. We're going to highlight, if you check source 3B, it talks about infrastructure projects. And that is comparable to source 3D, which talks about the Ethiopian Roads, Belt and Road Initiative. This is infrastructure development, which was done in Ethiopia, which is supported by the infrastructure projects, which are an initiative by China. Right. We also look at source 3B. It talks about BRICS strengthening cooperation with the World Trade Organization, which means it's fostering the improvements in trade and advocating for free trade. And also, if you check source 3D, it's talking about the railway has improved efficiency in trade. So those two ideas are supporting each other. This one is talking about cooperation with the World Trade Organization, which deals with trade, and this one is also talking about the railway line, which has improved efficiency in trade. Right, let's go to our last question, question 3.6. That is our paragraph question. Using the information in the relevant sources, write a paragraph explaining whether the Chinese Belt Initiative benefits BRICS countries. So my point, I will say, the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative benefits BRIC plus countries significantly. That is my answer. I want to say it's a benefit to the BRIC countries. Why am I saying so? I have to explain. It is accelerating infrastructure development. Infrastructure development. What else? It is boosting the intra-block trade. Countries in the bloc are increasing trading, and also it's enhancing regional connectivity. That's my explanation. Then I will pick my evidence. I can pick evidence from source 3A. It says BRI comprises of more than 900 infrastructure projects. I got that from source 3A. I'm supporting. And I can also talk about the Ethiopian Djibouti. The Ethiopian Djibouti railways has boosted Ethiopian economic development. Ethiopian economic development. I got that from source 3D. Then I can also quote the Americans from source 3C. However, the USA describe it as a debt trap. Where do I get this from? This is from source 3C. Then you provide your link to show that you were answering the question. It is evident that the BRI will positively impact on economies of BRIC plus. Right, that takes us to the end of section A. We now look at section B, which are our essay questions. I'm going to elaborate on how we are supposed to respond to those questions, and then just highlight briefly on the content of the question. Basically, I understand the content, you learners will be having it, but what you all need to do is to be able to structure your essay properly and also contextualize your arguments. So my main focus here is on contextualizing our introductions, and then the content will just highlight on the nature of responses that you are supposed to give for each and every response, for each and every question. So I'll start by highlighting on the introductions. Then after highlighting the introductions, then I will just briefly highlight on the content requirements. Right, our question is saying, explain to what extent Steve Biko and the Black Consciousness played a significant role in mobilizing Black South Africans to challenge the apartheid regime during the late 1960s. and the late 1970s. Support your line of argument with relevant historical evidence. Right, so what I want you to note here is when you're answering these questions, when you're doing your introduction, remember, you are supposed to address the three basic requirements. I will look at how you do your contextualized introduction. Right, we are looking at question number 4. Where is our question? You must address the three requirements. Let me indicate them here. For the introduction, we want number 1, an answer to the question, which is also our line of argument. Then number 2, we want reasons, or we are saying, why are you answering the question using that line of argument? And then number 3, we want an elaboration, or otherwise we are saying, what historical evidence are you going to use in the essay? So these are the basic requirements that we need for us to have a contextualized introduction. So what we did here is to have our line of argument in the context of the question. Our question is, the first question here is, explain to what extent. So in your answer, you must show the extent of how Steve Biko and the Black Consciousness played a significant role in mobilizing. So are we saying Steve Biko played a role in mobilizing people, or he did not? What extent? So in this instance, we are saying our answer is to a greater extent. To a greater Steve Biko and the Black Consciousness movement mobilized Black people, whatever the statement. Then the next statement is supposed to answer the reasons. Why are we saying Black Consciousness, Steve Biko was able to a greater extent influence Black people? What did he do? We now give general reasons. We are saying Black Consciousness movement enabled the Black South Africans to have psychological liberation. Or we can say it facilitated the unit of Black people. Or we can give a general reason. Black consciousness enabled Black people to have self-reliance. You are giving general reasons. Then we go on to elaboration. What is the essay going to prove? This essay is going to elaborate further on the mobilization of Black people, of Black South Africans against apartheid by the BCM. That is what you need to address in your introduction. That is a complete introduction for your first question, which is question number 4. So the content that you require there, I'll just highlight on some of the ideas that you need to use in your description. Remember, when you're writing your essay, don't focus much on the background information, because there are no marks there, because the background information does not answer the question. So your ideas there, you can look at the ideas that were instituted by Black consciousness for the people to challenge or for the people to be mobilized against apartheid. We can look at ideas of rejection of self-pity, Black people are supposed to reject the spirit of self-pity and alienation. We can also look at infusion of sense of pride, the Black people, and also Black consciousness. We can look at its influence in students. It influenced students. That is where we look at breaking away from NUSAS to Form SASO. It was an influence or a mobilization of the Black society. We look at mobilization of students through SASIM. We're looking at high school students. It was also an influence. You look at the Black People's Convention, how it brought unity amongst the Black community through the Black People's Convention, which was also a critical factor of mobilization. We can also look at the Black Allied Workers Union, the influence on labor through the activities of Black consciousness, instilling a sense of pride. We can look at issues like the Viva Frelimo Moralis, the influence of the independence of other neighboring countries. It revived the resistance to apartheid. Then we can also look at students' mobilization through the Soweto uprising. It's also another critical fact. Then we can also look at the rejection of Afrikaans as a medium of instruction. The learners were able to reject Afrikaans, the use of Afrikaans in schools as a learning language. And then we can also look at self-reliance. You look at community projects of Black consciousness and how they impacted on the apartheid government. You give examples. You also look at the formation of trade unions. And also you look at the influence of Black consciousness through the media. Look at publications that were affiliated to Black consciousness ideas. And then you can also look at other ideas like under Soweto uprising. Can also talk of the rejection of the boundary education system. It was through the conscience of Black consciousness, and it was a mobilization act to fight against an unfair education system. And then you can also look at the government's response through banning of Black consciousness affiliated print media, and also you can look at the death of Steve Biko as a key player. Then that marks your ideas. Not only limited to this, but these are some of the ideas that you can use. Then you can now be able to do your conclusion. What I advise you for the conclusion is you refer back to the question, and then you tie up your argument. You can make a reaffirmation of a key point without repeating it the same way it was presented in the essay. Right. That's basically what is required in that essay question. Those are the paragraph that you can create out of that essay question. Right. Then we also look at the other essay question. It is an essay question on the coming of democracy. It is saying the process of towards achieving a democratic South Africa between 1989 and 1994 was smooth. Why? Because of the role of skilled negotiators. Critically discuss this statement. support your line of argument with relevant historical information. So we also want to factor out an introduction of this particular essay. This is a critical discussion. Our question is here, where it says critically discuss. So for a critical discussion, we must either approve the statement or we must disapprove. So in this instance, are we saying that the process was smooth? No, it was not smooth. We might not we have to disapprove this. Why? Because there were so many incidents of violence. So in this instance, we are saying our line of argument, we can put it like this as our introduction. We are saying the process of achieving, or the process towards achieving a democratic South Africa was never a smooth process. That is our main line of argument. Then we need a counter line of argument. However, due to the role of skilled negotiators, they sacrificed and compromised until a democratic SA was achieved. You see, it's a dual line of argument. The main argument, we are saying it was not smooth. But however, the skilled negotiators, they tend to sacrifice and compromise until the result was achieved. Then we give reasons. Why are we saying it was never? The process was featured with violent incidences. That almost brought the process to a standstill. But also you need to look at the other side of the reasoning. You also give the reason for the role of the negotiators. And then you give your elaboration. That is your introduction. Then you check on the content requirements. What are you supposed to address? Your address of the question here is supposed to mainly focus on aspects with regard to the events that happened during the process of negotiation, from the change of government and the reforms that were introduced, and then you go to the several processes that took place. So we can start by looking at F.W. de Klerk taking over the control in 1989. And then when he took over from P.2 Botha, he also introduced reforms. And among some of the reforms, we are looking at the unbanning of political parties. The ANC and the PAC were unbanned, which made it a smooth transition. And also we look at the release of Nelson Mandela. and other leaders. It was another smooth transition which afforded a chance for negotiation. Then we also see the negotiations or the talks starting with the release of Nelson Mandela on March 31, 1990. But however, it was marred with violence in Sebokeng. It was now a disturbing factor, which gave it a challenge to the smooth process of transition. Then we're going to look at the Grootska minute as another step. This was on 2 May 1990. We're ongoing with the process. We look at the problem of the violence in the Vaal Triangle, which almost brought to a standstill to the negotiation process. Then we're also looking at the Pretoria Minute, another step. The Pretoria Minute was in August 1990. Then we can also look at the other event which happened after the Pretoria Minute. We look at the National Peace Accords. Then from there, we move on to the National Peace Accords. We move on to CODESA. Conventional for a Democratic South Africa, #1. And also we looked at it from the perspective of its time frame, December 1991. That was the 21st of December 1991. We look at the 19 political parties which signed and except the Conservative Party and also the PAC. Right, we also look at the Declaration of Intent. Then you look at CODESA 2. CODESA #2. Then you also look at disturbing violence, the Boipatong massacre, to show that the process was not smooth. It had violence. That was on the 17th of June, 1992. Disturbing violence. We move on to look at other aspects. Besides the Boipatong massacre, there was also the Bisho massacre, which also brought the negotiation process to a standstill. That was 17 September 1992 in the Bisho homeland. And also we are seeing ANC called for rolling mass action. People went on a protest in large numbers, and they continually do civil disobedience. That was in May 1992. And then we also look at the record of understanding. It showed compromise. This was by Rolf Meyer, the Minister of Constitutional Affairs, and Cyril Ramaphosa, who is the current president, who was by then the secretary for the ANC. They opted to resume the negotiations after a standstill. We give credit to their compromise. Then we also continue and look at, after the record of understanding, we also look at the proposition of the Government of National Unity for parties winning more than 5% of the vote. And then we also look at multi-party negotiations. At the World Trade Center near Kempton Park. But we also see incidents of violence. We look at the assassination of Chris Hani, which brought tension to the negotiation process. We also look at the AWB causing violence and trying to disturb the negotiation process at the World Trade Center. That was on 25 June 1993. This was disturbing violence. And also, we look at after Chris Hunt, that was on 10 April 1993. We give credit to the former President Nelson Mandela, who calmed the nation on TV, on national TV, to avoid further disruptions of the process. Then we also see the date of the first elections, which was set ultimately for 27 to the 29th of April 1994. And then we see the coming in of the first Black president in the name of Nelson Mandela. That was how the democratic South Africa was born. But if you check it, the process was not smooth. Then you can give your conclusion, you refer back to the question, and then you can reaffirm the key aspects of the question. Right, let's look at the last question, which is our question number 6. Question number 6, it's a question on the end of Cold War and the New World Order, the events of 1989. Right. It is saying Gorbachev's attempts to save the Soviet Union through policy changes, glasnost and perestroika, resulted in its ultimate collapse from the mid-1980s to 1991. Do you agree with this statement? Substantiate. Right, we need to figure out our introduction. Our question is, do you agree with this statement that the policy changes resulted in ultimate collapse? So when you are adopting your line of argument, you must answer the question. The question is saying, do you agree? This is question number 6. So in your answer, what you must do there, avoid using the first person. So you can say in agreement or in disagreement. Or one can agree or can disagree. We are avoiding using the first person. So in this instance, by analyzing this question, it depends with how you are going to argue. You can agree to the statement or you can disagree to the statement, depending on how you are going to argue in the essay. But basically, the ultimate result, we know that after Gorbachev, the Soviet Union ultimately collapsed, which means we must try to figure out a line of argument with a sort of agreement to the statement. So we can say, in this instance, I will take a line of argument which is positive. In agreement, the attempts by Gorbachev to save the Soviet Union led to its ultimate collapse. That can be my line of argument. Then why am I saying so? Chaos broke out in the Soviet Union. People demanded an end to communism. Demanded an end to communism. What else? New forms of nationalism emerged. Leading to a demand for independence. So we see that is why we are agreeing that the Soviet Union ultimately collapsed because of the chaos that emerged. Then you give your elaboration. This essay will elaborate further on how the reforms by Gorbachev led to the ultimate fall of the Soviet Union. Then in this instance, when you're answering your question, start by elaborating on the aspects in question. The background basically doesn't matter much. In the background, you focus on the arms race, you focus on issues of the ideological differences and the comparison, the competition between the USA, the Soviet Union as the superpowers. But that doesn't matter because it doesn't answer the question. So in your answer, you look at the perestroika. You look at what kind of a policy was it. It was a policy on economic reconstruction. What was it aiming? It aimed around removed government control. And also it was a policy that was trying to allow small-scale private ownership. And also inclusively, the policy also accepted some aspects of capitalism into communism. Right. That was the perestroika. Then you go to the glasnost. What was it about? It was a policy of openness. Or can say it was a policy of transparency. There was media freedom. Media was no longer censored. They were supposed to be given freedom to publish whatever they wanted to publish, which was true. And also it allowed non-communist parties joined the government. We see those transformations. And as a result, we also look at the release of political prisoners. People who were imprisoned for political reasons were supposed to be released. The political prisoners were released. That was also another advanced move of the policy of glasnost. So you describe those two policies. Then we want to go on and look at how the consequences of these policies led to the ultimate downfall. We look at perestroika. It was the perestroika policy was poorly implemented and was also poorly managed. And at the end, it brought confusion to the enterprises. They were now being made to operate under capitalist society when they were used to the communist society where there was government support. At the end, it did not reap positive economic results. And if you also look at glasnost, it led to criticism. It was criticized. So basically, people were now, because of openness, they were now able to criticize the government, including Gorbachev himself. They were openly criticizing the government, which means the flaws of the government were openly exposed, and hence people could no longer support that particular government because of its exposure. And also, if you look at the policy of perestroika, there was inability amongst the people to cope with market-driven economy. The influence of demand and supply, they were not used to that. They were used to state control. They could not cope up with the market demands. A market-driven economy needs adjustment, which was not a familiar aspect of management of economics by the Russian people. And also we look at lack of entrepreneurial spirit. The people did not have the spirit of being entrepreneurs. They were not used to that. So it was a new experience. At the same time, it was supposed to be implemented at the expense of the people who did not have the skill. And then if we look at that, it led to loss of jobs. There was high unemployment. And also we look at the issue of increasing inflation. Inflation increased significantly because of those policies. Right. We also check on those policies led to demands for the end of communism. People began to demand an end to communism because of the problems that were brought by those policies. And if you also look, Gorbachev ultimately lost support at home. He ultimately lost support of the majority of the people who were supposed to be giving support to him. And also, if you look at this led to the collapse of the Berlin Wall. Ultimately, in 1989, the Berlin Wall collapsed. And that marked a significant end to the Cold War tensions, because this Berlin Wall was acting as a significant mark of the Cold War tensions. So its collapse ultimately led to the collapse of the tensions. And it also meant that there was no more Cold War tensions, and there was now no incentive to keep supporting the communist system, because the world was now infused into one because of the fall of the Berlin Wall. And also, if you look at the Soviet Union, during that time, lost influence in East Europe. Remember, because of the uh, Iron Curtain, because of the Iron Curtain, we are saying Russia was having strong influence in East European states. But however, because of these changes, we are seeing Russia losing its influence or losing its grip over East European countries, which also marked a significant downfall. And also, if you check on it from the civic perspective, there was civil unrest. Civil unrest broke out. There was infighting amongst the civilians of the USSR. And also, if you check on December 25, 1991, we look at the USSR being dissolved. And you also check on the Communist Party. Was apparently disbanded. And each of the republics that made up the USSR, the 15 republics, they became independent. And also they became members of the Commonwealth. So we see that marked the significant disintegration of the the Soviet Union, which implied that the USA remained the only superpower. So if you check on these events, you can actually testify that the attempt by Gorbachev to save the USSR ultimately led to its downfall. the policies that he tried to implement, they posed a negative implication on the sustenance of the Soviet Union. And that ultimately led to its disintegration. And because of the typical problems that the policies brought, he thought in his pretext that if he was to change the policies which were there, he was going to bring in policies that were going to reap positive results for the betterment of the society of the Soviet Union. But however, the truth was the policies, they later on posed negative implications and leading ultimately to the downfall of the Soviet Union. So we see at the end, we are seeing the republics that were making up the Soviet Union, they became independent. And also as a result, we are seeing that the USSR, when it fell, now only the USA was now the leading and remaining superpower in the world. Then that marks your end of the body. Then you have to do your conclusion. And then in the conclusion, maybe you can refer back to the question. You refer back to the question, and then maybe you can reaffirm key points. You tie up your argument. Yeah, that's basically what is required in that particular essay question. So that was our last question from our paper, which is our June paper. And what you must keep in mind is for those who are preparing for their coming examinations, you need just to elaborate on the content. Like I was just summarizing the points that you need for the essay. What you need is to elaborate on those points to make clear peel paragraphs. A paragraph which is contextualized, which is answering the question, which is relating to the question. So basically, that is how those questions were supposed to be answered, but that's not all what was supposed to be. We did not exhaust for the sake of time. There are some other possible responses that we could not highlight in the discussion, but which are also very relevant and which can also be credited as correct responses. So with that being said and done, that was our June paper for this session of 2026. And I hope the discussion is also going to take you along in preparing for other coming examinations. And for those who sat for the paper, I wish you the best in whatever you had presented. With that being said and done, I can safely conclude that we have come to the end of this discussion. Your host in history, till we meet again in other upcoming discussions. Thank you for watching. A very good day to you, history learners. Welcome to our discussion for the May-June session examination for paper 2. Right, there is our paper. We are going to go through the paper and going to discuss the questions and also give the suggested possible responses to the questions. Right, as usual, our paper is out of 150, which means you can either answer 2 source-based questions in one essay, or you can answer